So it is now my pleasure to introduce our first extraordinary keynote speaker, Rozina Kanchwala. A creative entrepreneur and playwright, Rozina founded Eco.Logic, a nonprofit that intertwines activism with the arts and focuses on building connections and inspiring environmental action. Rozina is an energy and environmental professional she's an energy and environmental professional with global academic and field experience. As a Fulbright Scholar, she spent a year in India researching agrarian distress, after which she completed a master's in environment and sustainable development from the University College in London. Rozina served as the Director of Partnerships at the Clean Energy Leadership Institute and sits on the board of Climate Land Leaders. And Rozina has bylines in Foreign Affairs, Teen Vogue, Common Dreams, San Antonio Express News, and The Third Pole. Please join me in welcoming Rozina to the stage.
All right, sound check. How does that sound? All right. Thank you. To speak today. I'm truly honored to be here and talk about something that I'm so passionate about, which is why art is so essential in the climate movement and in advancing justice. And to echo some of what the mayor just said, it is such a joy to be here today to gather in this moment among like-minded people. And so thank you all for being here, and thank you all for the invitation again to speak. So I want to begin by asking you to reflect on this question. Why, despite overwhelming scientific evidence, do we struggle to move people towards climate action? And of course, I don't want to gloss over the fact that special interest groups and money in politics are very real barriers and large obstacles to climate action. But how can we get everyday people, our friends, our coworkers, and our families to engage and to feel empowered so that we can counter those forces that are not in the majority but are standing in the way? And we often think about climate action in terms of science and policy, which are absolutely essential. But it's art and stories that connect us to these issues in a way that can move us to then act. So I want to start by sharing how art, and specifically storytelling, has shaped my journey in climate work. So you've just heard a brief bio and background of me, so I won't go into that. But what I do want to do is share 3 stories that I've experienced that have shaped me and informed the work that I do. So this first one, in 4th grade, I learned about Rachel Carson and her book, Silent Spring. And I did not understand the book. I did try to read it. But I understood the gist, that birds were dying because of chemicals. And as a 4th grader, this worried and haunted me. And it sparked a lifelong question in me that if we know something is destructive, why are we doing it? Years later, during a study abroad program in Senegal, I met someone who pointed to the land around him and said, the desert is coming closer every year and it's affecting how and what crops I can grow. And he wasn't stating a fact, he wasn't giving me measurements of the desert, but he was sharing a story filled with worry about the future. And that conversation made climate change feel real to me in a way that no statistic ever had. And the third story is a few years after that, when I was in India doing my Fulbright research and I was exploring the topic of farmer suicides. I had read statistics and I knew it was dire. So let me share one such statistic. Between 1995 and 2015, there were a reported number of over 300,000 farmer suicides in India. And this figure is shocking and also hard for me to wrap my mind around. And if we want to be able to address something so large and so serious, we need to be able to understand what's happening behind these numbers, because these numbers alone don't tell the whole story. So when I was in India, I met with farming communities, including many widows of these late farmers, and it was there that I began to understand the weight of the reality. I met a woman named Jakla Punama who had lost her husband just months earlier. He had been burdened by debt from moneylenders, squeezed by agribusiness companies that sold him expensive seeds and chemicals that did not work, and experienced climatic changes that resulted in less rainfall, leading to crop failure. One evening, after exhausting every possible way to repay his debts, he drank his last bottle of pesticide. Sadly, his story is not uncommon. And so his wife was now left with his burdens and her own, and told me that he believed this was the only choice he had. So this here isn't just a statistic. Behind it, there's a story of loss, of systemic failure, and a story of vulnerable people in the face of climate change. And the story that I shared exposes the gaps between what we know from this data and what we feel when we witness the reality up close. So each of these stories changed me, not because of numbers or facts behind them, but because they made me feel something. And that's why storytelling is so powerful in the climate movement, because while facts inform, it's stories that transform. So I want you all to think about what stories have moved you to feel something or to take action. And of course, hard facts, data, technical solutions, these are all so needed in the moment. But the crisis today is so large that we also need artists and storytellers to help make a cultural shift happen. So my presentation today will be on how we can use the arts to advance that shift that is needed. So let me continue to illustrate how storytelling can be a powerful tool to help humanize the data that we all hear and know. So here are some facts that I suspect some of you are familiar with. Global temperatures in 2024 were 2.3 degrees Fahrenheit above the 20th century baseline, which tops the record set in 2023. And last year, for the first time, we surpassed 420 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So if and when the media reports on climate change, these are the types of things that we hear or we read. And to this climate-aware audience, I suspect that you feel the weight of these numbers. But to your uncle, to your neighbor, to your friend who may not really care about climate change or see why it's so serious, these facts are unlikely going to inspire change or invoke any emotions. Who even knows how many parts per million of carbon dioxide there should be in the atmosphere? And to someone experiencing a cold Midwestern spring day, maybe this doesn't sound so bad, right? But what we know is that a 1.5 degree warmer world can be catastrophic. So what if instead of these figures, we were able to share a story about an intense heat wave that demonstrates what a 2 degree warmer world looks like? So I'm going to share an excerpt from a book called The Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. Has anyone here read that book? Okay, a handful. Great. It's a fictional book about a man named Frank who is an aid worker in India and experiencing a deadly heat wave. So,
Frank, Ministry for the Future, Kim Stanley Robinson. He could have worked in Alaska. Instead, sweat was dripping into his eyes and stinging. He was wet, wearing only a pair of shorts. Those too were wet. There were wet patches on his mat where he had tried to sleep. He was thirsty and the jug by his bedside was empty. All over town, the stressed hum of window box air conditioner fans buzzed like giant mosquitoes. And then the sun cracked the eastern horizon. It blazed like an atomic bomb, which of course it was. The heat coming from it was palpable, a slap to the face. He looked at his phone. 38 degrees. In Fahrenheit, he tapped. 103 degrees. Humidity about 35%. The combination was the thing. A few years ago, it would have been among the hottest wet bulb temperatures ever recorded. Now just a Wednesday morning. Wails of dismay cut the air, coming from the rooftop across the street. Cries of distress, a pair of young women leaning over the wall calling down to the street. Someone on that roof was not waking up. Then the sound of the air conditioners cut off. More cries of distress. His phone no longer showed any bars. Electricity gone. Brownout or blackout. Sirens like the wails of gods and goddesses, the whole Hindu pantheon in distress. Generators were already firing up, loud two-stroke engines, illegal gas, diesel, kerosene, saved for situations like these, when the law requiring use of liquid natural gas gave way to necessity. The air, already bad, would soon be a blanket of exhaust, like breathing from the exhaust pipe of an old bus. Frank coughed at the thought of it, tried again to drink from the jug by his bed. It was still empty.
So it goes on and paints a really dire picture of the heat wave, where you can almost feel his unquenchable thirst and his dismay over the empty jug. And this is the kind of storytelling that I think can help capture what a heat wave looks and feels like in a way that temperature numbers won't. So I want you to compare how you felt when I read these figures displayed here and how you felt after hearing Frank's story. So some other statistics that we're often confronted with are here. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees estimates that on average 21.5 million people were displaced annually due to weather-related events from 2008 to 2018. And by 2050, there will be 1.2 billion people displaced globally due to climate change. These are numbers that I personally can't wrap my head around. They are massive, they feel very serious, but maybe not in an emotional way for me. So again, I want you to reflect on what these statistics do for you. And now let me share a story with you about a boy named Carlos from Guatemala. And the story that you're about to hear, it's a true story based on a story of a 16-year-old boy.
I used to be happy. I remember those days when I was a child and I played the marimba. I used to eat dinner with all my family, my parents, my 8 siblings. We talked not only about how school was and the teachers who we like and dislike, but we also talked about social issues such as how we have a shortage of water that causes a lot of problems with crop production. My parents fled due to the drastic impact that droughts had on the agricultural production of key cash crops like coffee and beans. Fossil fuel companies had been filling the air with unprecedented amounts of greenhouse gases. To make things worse, these same unregulated companies had polluted our water, making it harder for us to grow our vital crops. These environmental factors drove my parents to seek refuge in the United States, even though that country has horrendous policies for immigrants from Central America, which negatively impacts migrants who don't have enough money to seek refuge. Things changed when I was 16. I left home by boat to support my 8 siblings, and me and my parents in the United States. When I got to the United States, I started to feel hot and cold at the same time, and I knew something wasn't right because I felt so sick. My time in the United States was cut short when everyone was forced off of the boat and was taken to a detention center. When I was taken to the detention center in Texas, the nurse there checked my temperature and I was diagnosed with the flu. If your condition gets any worse, we'll go to the hospital, she said. But my condition was already bad enough and I was confused as to why I was in the detention center. A mal tiempo buena cara, my mother always used to say to me. It's a Guatemalan saying that translates to, at bad times, have a good face. I started to feel sorry for my family and wondered if I would ever reunite with them. I tried to walk to the small, unsanitary bathroom in my cell, but I noticed I couldn't even walk straight anymore. I cupped my hands on my mouth to stop myself from gagging. But I saw that there was a puddle of blood falling from my hands. I thanked God for my family. Hopefully all happy in Texas, with enough resources to stay as a family full of love, peace, and happiness. I smiled before I fell to the floor because I wanted to show my mother that I had a buena cara during the mal tiempo.
So Carlos died, becoming one of hundreds of people who have died while detained in U.S. immigration centers since 2004. And so perhaps we can take a moment of pause to honor all the lives that have been lost in detention centers. But I want to ask how you felt after hearing Carlos's story. And through his story, we were perhaps able to understand what one boy's climate-induced migration story looks like. So while these statistics perhaps informed us, I don't think that they moved us. And we can continue to humanize statistics in this way. We have stats on sea level rise, we have stats on glacial ice melting, we have stats on how climate impacts public health, and so on. And with each of these statistics, we can pair them with human stories that can make us feel the weight of the numbers. And studies show that our brains are wired to respond more to stories than to numbers. We connect with emotions, faces, and personal struggles, not abstract data points. So consider a study by psychologist Paul Slovich. He found that people are, when presented with statistics about famine, are far less likely to donate or to take action than when they hear about a single child facing starvation. And this is called the identifiable victim effect. We care more when we see a human face and hear a personal story rather than just numbers on a page. And similarly, the journalist Elizabeth Colbert, whose work some of you may be familiar with, has spent years reporting on climate change. And she points out that we all have the scientific knowledge that we need to act, yet we don't. Because of cognitive biases like confirmation bias, people are resistant to new information unless it's presented in a compelling way. And stories can help bypass that resistance by engaging emotions and personal relevance. And that's why my time in India talking to farmers' families changed my understanding of the crisis in a way that reading reports never could. I wasn't just reading about 300,000 suicides. I was sitting with a widow who had lost her husband, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice, and I could see the weight of loss in her eyes. And that's what made me feel the urgency of the crisis, not just understand it intellectually. So I want to ask you all to think about what stories will you tell to bring the urgency of this moment to life. And while I've shared these stories with you in an attempt to humanize climate data, I also want to note that there may be some limitations here. We don't want to victimize people or exploit an individual's experience to illustrate a point. So it's important that we're constantly thinking about the why behind the story. A classic example might be UNICEF using images of malnourished babies. And of course, they were doing that to raise awareness and funds. So it's not necessarily a good or bad thing, but it's the how and the why. And one might argue that an overarching impact of those visuals and those stories is that for decades, people associate famine and starvation with Africa, which is devastating and an ongoing impact. So in our attempt to humanize climate statistics, let's make sure that we're actually humanizing the people and centering their voices. So in the vein of storytelling, let's talk about climate fiction, also known as cli-fi. It's an emerging genre, and it's so important to our movement for two main reasons. The first is that it allows us to imagine solutions. Too often, we're caught up in the gloom and doom of climate change, which is real, it's valid, climate change is incredibly scary. But by exploring possible futures in which climate change is addressed and mitigated, climate fiction can help spark new ideas and innovative solutions for addressing the crisis. We need creativity in this movement now more than ever. We need to imagine system changes and a regenerative future, and cli-fi can give us the space to do that. Does it feel like we might be living in the imagination of fascists right now? I think it's time that we imagine the future that we want to see. And secondly, and very importantly, climate fiction can give voice to marginalized communities and help to amplify their perspectives and experiences. By featuring characters from diverse backgrounds and communities, climate fiction can challenge dominant narratives and provide a platform for underrepresented voices in the climate movement. So when I was looking for stories to share with you to help illustrate the data points, I had read Ministry for the Future, but what was interesting to me is how many other sources pointed me to that book as well. And it made me realize that perhaps there just aren't very many climate fiction books out there, so that's an invitation for you all to contribute to that genre. But also it did make me question that when heat waves throughout India are so increasingly common, why am I not able to find stories from Indian perspectives, and why is Frank's story the one that I'm able to find? So at Eco.Logic, we recently ran a workshop called Storytelling for Climate Justice with students at the Asian University of Women. And these participants had such unique and intersecting identities. Some were refugees, many had experienced climate change firsthand, and none of them spoke English as their first language, and yet were so eager to participate and contribute to this anthology that we put together that had some of their stories in there, and it's available online. I also have a couple of copies that happy to share if you'd like to take a look. So yeah, this was just such an incredible experience for me to be able to learn so much from the lived realities of these women. And of course, art takes many forms. So I started off by sharing storytelling narratives, but of course there's theater, there's dance, data visualization, music, visual art, material art. And so let's explore some of these other art forms and how they can assist with the cultural shift that we need and move us towards a more livable and just world. So I'll start with theater, which is an art form that Eco.Logic has used. In 2019, we produced our first play called Love in the Time of Climate Change, which was a way that we could talk about some important issues in an accessible and comedic way. The story followed the journey of a millennial woman suffering from climate anxiety, dealing with the woes of modern dating, and figuring out how she could make a difference. Through this play, we introduced a few key themes, including solastalgia, which is a psychological and emotional state detailing the anxiety about our changing planet. So through this platform, we were able to humanize this condition, show people that they're not alone in this feeling, and give space to talk about this. Pictured here is our protagonist from the play. We educated about how climate and migration are often interlinked through the lens of Marisol, an El Salvadorian climate migrant. Our play introduced this bill, which was modeled after the real bill in Congress, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. And we invited our audience to meet with champions of the bill from a group some of you might be involved with, Citizens Climate Lobby, following the play, and they were actually invited to write letters that would then be delivered to their members of Congress. So the play gave an opportunity to learn, to engage, and then to take action. And the play highlighted the importance of community, which was ultimately the love, spoiler alert, that our protagonist found in spite of the wacky dates she went on. It was community that came together at the end for her to fight the corporations with, lobby the government into taking action, and ultimately face the climate crisis. So in this way, we were able to talk about so many issues in a lighthearted way that gave people a sense of belonging and camaraderie. And the amount of people who talked about how relatable various aspects of the play were or how they learned about an issue was incredible. So a little plug for our second play. If any of you are from Chicago or DC, here are our show dates for Come Along for the Ride, which explores many similar themes, including climate grief and intersecting issues, including climate and migration or eroding democracy and how to build resilience. So come check it out. And part of our theater programming includes table reads, play workshopping, and talkbacks to really create that space for reflection, for community building, and thinking through how to take action. So often when we think of art, it's visual art that comes to mind, so we'll go there. At Eco.Logic, we've hosted eco-art exhibits, and I want to share a few pieces from those exhibits which were used to educate people about environmental issues through art. So this piece right here is A Contaminated Network by Samantha B. Litley, and she explores the fragile state of pollinators, which, as we know, are critical components to our agricultural systems and increasingly at risk. And in this piece, the viewer, the plants and pollinators, and the connection is the emphasis. This piece here, Submerged, A Desperate Dive by Angela Ng, who is a scuba diver and witnesses ocean pollution up close, wanted to combine her love for photography and her love for the oceans into this compelling photo exhibit. And some of these are land animals, some of these are ocean animals, but the common theme, as you can see, is the pollution that we have to confront when we look at these images. This is another painting that's part of a series of 9 paintings. It's Geometric Ecosystems. This one in particular is the Mesoamerican Reef by Jane Clark, and this is the largest barrier reef in the Western Hemisphere that is being threatened by overfishing, pollution, inappropriate tourism practices, climate change. And through these paintings, the artist is able to invite us to learn more about these fragile ecosystems. And what's really cool about ecosystems is often, if given the right conditions, they are able to bounce back. And so through art is able to convey so much. This one here, First Steps by Maria, is a baby turtle taking its first steps to the sea, only to find that it's full of plastic. And then this piece, Commoditized by Shadi Ahmadnia, the background depicts satellite imagery of deforestation in central Borneo. So the green represents tree cover, and the magenta is tree cover loss within the last decade. And then with a knife, the artist carved out a monstera plant, which is an increasingly popular house plant. And just kind of through this showcases that humans are both driving the destruction of natural landscapes and also drawn to nature and dependent on nature for our well-being. What's really cool about art is that while language can be a barrier, art can break down those barriers and we can communicate across a different medium. So environmental art can create a space to express the beauty of the natural world and also allow us to express angst over the destruction of the natural world. And it creates a space to raise awareness and help us imagine the world that we want to live in. So one form of visual art is data visualization. This might be something some of you recognize. It's called Climate Stripes, and it tells a story visually. It shows the shift in global temperature from 1850 to 2024 in a way that we can't ignore what's happening. I don't need to see the numbers, the temperature changes, for me to know that something is shifting and shifting quickly. So I think what's really cool about art is that you don't need to call yourself an artist, but all of us are artists, and we're all doing the work. So how can we bring life into that work to make that transformational piece happen? So those of you who do research or policy work, that's storytelling and that's art. So think about where you can insert that transformational piece that gets someone to think or see something differently, that gets someone to act differently. So really quickly, these are just two different graphs that I pulled offline. This here is a Sankey graph. And again, I don't need to know the details to know, I can visually see how much big oil is spending on obstructing climate lobbying. So visually, this is what I'm able to pick up. This here is from Project Drawdown. And again, I don't need to see numbers, but I can see that electricity, food and agriculture, and land sinks are the big buckets that maybe I can focus on. So data visualization can be an invitation to learn more in a way that a report might just be too much that someone does not want to take a look at. So another form of visual art is material art. And we all know that fast fashion is an industry that is one of the biggest polluters, exploiting workers and resources and creating massive textile waste. We know that unused fast fashion waste can now be seen from space. Pictured here is Chile's Atacama Desert, the site where many of those Shein, H&M, Zara clothes end up. And so material art can be a way to counter that. We can upcycle, mend, DIY fashion as a creative response to overconsumption. Clothes are art and clothing tells stories. So by mending old clothes, maybe adding embroidery to our clothes, we can make them more personal, add a story, make them more unique. So here's one example of a hand-me-down shirt that I received that had a little mark on it, and I was able to draw a little dandelion, added some embroidery, and gave it a little bit more character. So in this way, we can all try to mend clothes, host repair and mending circles, clothing swaps, and think about how to design outfits from thrifted stores. So if there is something in your wardrobe that's pushed to the back of your closet, can you think about how you might be able to add art to it and give it new life? So another art form that we're all familiar with is film. And of course, there's An Inconvenient Truth, which helped a lot of people understand the crisis about 2 decades ago now. Can I see a show of hands of who's seen An Inconvenient Truth? Okay, can you keep those hands up if that film helped shape or informed your understanding of the climate crisis? Yeah, great. And then, of course, there are fictional films like Don't Look Up. Show of hands, who's seen Don't Look Up? Okay, keep those hands up if that helped shape or inform your understanding of maybe the media. Yeah, so Don't Look Up, it was, by the way, one of the most streamed films when it was released in 2021. It was a dark comedy satire that was able to engage with a wider audience as it critiqued media coverage on climate. So unrelated to these films, I recently came across a video that I am going to now play for you.
Hi, are you all right?
I think so. Are these indoor plants?
Yeah, they certainly are.
Oh, good, good.
So that's £13.50. Do you want to pay cash or card?
Oh, card, please.
Oh, a bit longer, actually, because it needs to...
There we are. Amazing, isn't it, really?
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Oh, those are nice.
Goodbye, the old store.
Oh, don't worry, we're not going anywhere. That's £27, please. Cash or card?
Card, please.
Receipt.
Oh, no thanks.
Love it. Save the trees and all that. Have a good day.
You can understand. It's just
Hi,
that...
how you doing?
Yeah, fine, sorry.
No, sorry, Jodie. I wasn't talking to you.
God.
Fantastic. Yeah. Give me 2 seconds, Jerry. Do you think this will make a good present?
Yeah? I mean, no, I could gift
No,
wrap
go
before
on,
your...
Jerry. Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Nice one, man.
Next. Next. Next.
I don't know. I can't decide. Why don't we just get both? What do you think?
Oh, well, I mean, I love this one. Also, it's air purifying, so that's great. Yeah. Let's go for the little one. Special card?
Okay, so pretty powerful, right? That was made by Make My Money Matter, which is a UK-based entity. But imagine if this was the kind of advertisement played during the Super Bowl. I just wonder what impact this would have. And so we know that imagery and film have the ability to shift perspectives. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the recent Oscar-winning documentary, No Other Land, as well as the backlash that the directors have been facing because they're exposing uncomfortable truths. And the reaction to the film is proof of just how powerful storytelling can be, because stories challenge narratives and those in power fear that. So for those of you who don't know, No Other Land is a story about Palestine, which is a climate justice issue, and as environmentalists, we need to pay attention to what's happening there, because all the solar coming on the grid doesn't matter if our collective work is being undone by the destruction of olive trees, water access being restricted, or bombs raining down. And so art is about resistance and resilience. And in the way that visual art and film can play a role, so do music and dance. And all of these art forms tell stories and assist in the cultural shift that we need. So one music pop duo that we frequently collaborate with is a band called Lil Italy. And through their music, they remind us that humans are a part of nature, not outside of it. And they invite us to consider, what do we owe each other on a warming planet? So if I may, I'll play just a short clip so you can get a teaser, but be sure to give them a follow and check out their music.
'Cause the earth is allergic to you. Without me, so why can't you just let the earth be?
Okay, so just a teaser, but definitely check them out. And one form of art that Eco.Logic has not yet engaged with, but is a powerful art form, is dance. So I'll just share a couple of examples to showcase that this exists and that we need more of this. On the left, Jody Sperling's Bringing the Arctic Home premiered in 2015 and was inspired by her experience accompanying a scientific mission and dancing on Arctic ice. And then on the right, Davalos Firon uses dance to talk about water resources. And as part of her work, Consider Water, 2 dancers randomly distribute cups to audience members, and a third pours water into some of those cups. And the symbolism allows other audience members to glimpse what it feels like to be denied a resource, overlooked, and ignored. So as I mentioned, we're at a point where we need policy shifts and we need technical solutions, but none of those can be implemented or possible without a cultural shift. And often in our society, the arts are undervalued, sometimes seen as frivolous, and there's a reason that the arts are often defunded first, because they are so powerful in shifting perspectives. So I want to share this quote, which tells us that art is not a mirror held up to reality, but a hammer with which to shape it. So once again, let me ask you to think about what art will you create to bring the urgency of this moment to life? And all of us are artists. Through art, we can actually make the work more accessible. You don't have to call yourself an artist, but can you host a book club? Can you host a film screening? Can you mend your clothes? Can you turn your report into a data visual chart that invites people to learn more? Can you lean into creative spaces of thinking about solutions? Because art is an imagination, and we don't want to be living in other people's imaginations. It's time we shape and create the worlds that we want to live in. So I've talked a little bit about Eco.Logic throughout this presentation, but before I close, I'll just talk a little bit more about what we do and the impact that we've had. So we are an arts-based environmental education organization working to inspire action. We turn 5 years old officially as a 501c3 this month. And we focus on 4 areas of programming. So eco-art, I've talked a lot about. That includes our theater, our visual art, and our storytelling workshops. Eco-crews are weekly meetup groups to foster climate action through community support. Our Camp Eco.Logic focuses on immersive, sustainable experiences for youth. And through our eco-restoration work, we are encouraging more land-based climate solutions. Our pillars are to educate, build community, and inspire action, and we do that through our values of intersectionality, creativity, and inclusivity. Our work is primarily located in Illinois and Washington, D.C., so if you're in those areas, please connect with us. And even if you're not, there are ways to engage. We currently have a membership drive ongoing, so it's a way to support our work and receive environmental art in exchange, so check that out. Subscribe to our newsletter, follow us on socials, and as I said, we're a new organization, so we're always open to new ideas and collaboration. So that's my email. Please reach out and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Hey, I want to say thank you for your presentation, very much so. I'm a fellow artist from Kansas City, Missouri, graduated from Kansas City Art Institute. Yes, shouts out. The idea of art as installation, we actually took a vacant property and turned it into something that generates revenue for the neighborhood. And so, like, we've been screaming that art, nature, and neighborhoods is the answer. So to be able to hear this presentation, we greatly appreciate it. I just wanted to acknowledge that and to say how can we push further for the arts, nature, and neighborhood to liberate us. This is like revolutionary. Tony K. Bambara said the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. And through storytelling, you're doing that. So I just want to say thank you for what you do and keep on championing.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Maybe next time I need to include installation art because that, yeah. So thank you.
On this side. It's a great presentation. Question I've got for you is how do we get our kids in school? I mean, I like the art program and creating art, eco-art. How do we get our kids in school to get involved? Because when we get our kids in school involved, we get the parents involved, gets the community involved.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's definitely a question that we have been pondering and working through at Eco.Logic. I've just noticed that there is so much competition for programming for the youth, and I think there's always a way to include the arts into the things that are happening. So I feel like one of the programs that we run, it's around our theater program where we get the youth involved to like do the set designs and the costumes from an environmentally conscious perspective. But again, I think this is where that cultural shift needs to happen, where doing the environmental art programming is just as cool as doing everything else, the STEM programming, which is all very important. But I think this is where it does take a lot more, for us, like we're working with schools to introduce this programming. And so I think it's just gonna be constantly just like pushing that to get more people engaged with it.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation, fantastic. Curious if you have any insights on, I feel like those who might be opposed to acting against climate change have done a pretty good job of creating some really strong narratives and telling some impactful stories. Curious your thoughts on storytelling to take those narratives on head on versus creating sort of separate stories, telling our own story independently of the stories that are being told in opposition. I'm not sure if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. That's a great question. And I think what is sort of reassuring to me is that I think the people who are kind of antagonistic happen to be louder rather than in the majority. And so there is, I think the Yale program on climate change communication, they always put out studies of things of like how many Americans are concerned about climate change. And that number seems to grow every year, but they also have a question in their study that's like how many people are talking about climate change. And that number is always significantly less than the people that are concerned about it. And there is sort of this like, oh, well, I don't know what this person's thinking. And similarly, that person doesn't know what I'm thinking, so no one's talking about it. And so I think we just need to talk more about it and share our stories. And the reality is more and more of us are facing the realities of climate change, like it's getting closer and closer. And so we don't have to like look so far anymore for these stories. And I think it's a matter of just constantly like sharing those stories, humanizing those stories. There's also Dr. Catherine Hayhoe who has said like the most important thing you can do for climate change is to talk about it. And once we have more people talking about it, that's when we can address it. So I hope that answers your question, but I think it's a matter of just like keeping it relevant and not like desensitizing people to it in the way that's like, well, it's 2 degrees warmer, like I don't think that does anything for people who are not going to be plugged in.
Hi, I just want to thank you again. That was a great presentation, and you touched on a couple of points. So one of the ones is that there needs to be budgeting to make sure that artists are being compensated for this work, right? And I also want to put a plug in for the Yale School. I actually did that program, 18 weeks. It was fabulous for people who aren't coming from that kind of background. That's a great way to actually hone those skills and learn how other communities are communicating this type of information. But we need to make sure that we're compensating the artists. We need to figure out how do we create those relationships. I had a colleague who was using a local artist's work in a PowerPoint, and I'm like, could you at least credit them? Like, I know you didn't pay them, but like, could you at least make sure their name's in there? So part of this becomes how do we bridge what seems like 2 different kinds of worlds to make sure that we're working together to communicate something effectively. Yeah. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question over here. A couple years ago, I had an opportunity to do a little research into virtual reality as a tool to teach kids about environmental sustainability. And kind of to my surprise, there are some studies out there that show it can be an effective teaching tool because virtual environments can visualize environmental concepts that can otherwise be hard to see or grasp or understand if they're kind of vast or molecular, either way. I was just wondering if you have worked with virtual reality at all and what your opinion is of that.
Yeah, no, I have not worked with that, but I can totally see that that would be effective. I think it's a form of film in a sense. So, I mean, I'm sure that, to me, it's like whatever it takes to get people to understand and care, I'm all for. So that's not one that I've personally used, but yeah, I like to hear that it's working, yeah.
Thank you. Let's give Rozina a hand one more time. Thank you so much. Such a fascinating and thought-provoking discussion, so thank you. I think that's really going to help kickstart us in the rest of the day here. Everybody have a wonderful day, and we'll see you again.